Good afternoon, and welcome to the Guild of One Name Studies 7 Pillars Approach webinar series. I'm Tessa Keogh, and together with Julie Goucher, we're hosting today's webinar. A quick reminder to those of you who might not be familiar with the Guild's website. Simply type one-name.org into your browser, and you'll be taken to the homepage of our website. Members and non-members alike can view events in the drop-down menu and then select webinar events. The Guild Webinar Series 2018 has its own page. You can watch the short video introduction to our webinar series and read a bit about our plans for the year. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll find the list of future webinars, as well as a bit of information about the Guild's Marketing Action Team, MAT for short. If you scroll down the page, you'll find the schedule with links to each of the recordings of past webinars. Recordings will be freely available to all in most cases for 7 days after the live event. An exception is our first webinar from December, and that will always be available. After 7 days, the recordings will be placed behind the members' paywall. And members, what that means is you'll need to log into the Guild website to access them. On the webinar events page, you can also find the links to register for any of our upcoming webinars. These links will take you directly to the GoToWebinar platform, and you can sign up for one or all of the webinars. Now, there's a few reminders. You'll need to register in advance because we have a limited number of spaces, and you'll receive a confirmation email. Once registered, you'll receive 2 reminders, one a few days before and one a few hours before the webinar. The confirmation email and the reminders all have that same link to click on to join the webinar. You'll be able to ask questions in the chat box, which will be addressed at the end of the presentation, and you can download any PDF handouts that the presenters provide. And you'll notice that today we have 3 handouts, one about the Guild, one gathering data for this webinar. That's the slides that we've put together as a PDF. And the final one is a list of websites with links that Paul Howes put together. And now let's get started with our 3rd webinar in the series, Gathering Data with Paul Featherston and Paul Howes. Paul Featherston began his family history research in the 1980s when one of his sons asked how they were related to an aunt, who it turned out they weren't. His one-name study started when he was told by a contact he could take his Featherstone line back to the 1500s. Paul has since proved her wrong, but this was before the internet era. Paul has produced 77 newsletters about people sharing the surname, and his newsletters began in 1996. His one-name study database has over 77,000 individuals. In addition to working on his own one-name study, he serves on committee. He's the project leader for the Members Website Project. He's the events manager. He serves on the Marketing Action Team, and he's the Conference AGM 2018 organizer. Personally, I don't know where he finds the time to work on his study. Paul Howes is an actuary by profession, and before retiring 5 years ago and moving to Florida, he was a senior partner in a global consulting firm. He's lived in 6 countries and worked in over 50. Paul speaks Dutch, French, and German with smatterings of other languages, including Mandarin, Chinese, and Welsh. So if you need any help with translation, you know who to contact. Since 2015, Paul has been the chairman of the Guild of One Name Studies, and he's spoken at several family history conferences, both in the UK and in the United States. When he's not working on his one name study, Paul is an executive coach and a keen yachtsman. And now I'm turning it over to Paul Featherston.
Welcome, my name is Paul Featherstone, and I will be telling you all about my data gathering, where to look and where to put it, and show you what I do with the data I collect. I will then hand over things to Paul Howes, and he will explain what he does. This is what we hope to cover today, how we each approach data gathering in our own studies. There is no right or wrong way, this is just 2 different approaches to these topics. You will find many of our members do something different in some or all of these topics. This little snippet sums up what a one-name study researcher does. Be it a small study in terms of numbers or a large one, the only difference might be how and what you collect and how you record the information. It is possible just to collect information, maybe akin to a train spotter. Personally, I prefer collecting and then trying to place the information found to make a family line, putting people in the context of a period in history. Before computers and the internet and the adding of record collections by companies like Ancestry and Find My Past, this involved going to record offices, interviewing relatives, or just collecting what local family history societies had indexed. Before the internet, large studies were difficult to progress, and so earlier studies tended to be small. Now, of course, you can collect hundreds of records in a couple of hours. It took me literally 10 years to collect the birth, marriage, and death registrations in England and Wales by visiting the record offices and writing down from the lists available, taking them home and typing them in. The collecting of the facts about a person's life that are available to the family history researcher, we call it data collection. These facts can be collected by many different means: interviewing the actual person or his family, from a national record database, from local databases, from newspaper articles, from gravestones, from official documents, and from published articles. You may find these facts anywhere in the world. There are more places to collect data than I could have listed in a lifetime. A Google search for family history records gives 13,700,000 links in 0.6 of a second. You, of course, will be more specific in searching. If I put Yorkshire in front of family history records, I only get 2,830,000 results. If I add North Yorkshire, I get 5,200,000 results. If I add Craig Parish family history records, it comes down to 14,600 results. If I search for someone in my study who I know was sort of famous, Isaac Earl Featherstone, my search brings it to 59,100 hits. And on the third page, I found the link to my website and his entry. So the tighter you make your searches, the better chance you have of finding what you're looking for. And of course, not everything is online, so record offices should be on this list. A number of sites enable you to export a body of data easily as a comma-separated value, CSV, or plain text files, which can be inserted into a spreadsheet for sorting into any order you want, and maybe entry into your selected program. All studies are individual. It's important to define your aims for data gathering. What are you hoping to achieve? Do you want to collect data, or do you want to reconstruct families, or do a bit of both? Neither approach is wrong. They are just different. Saving these facts in a database can be manipulated to show the facts in a timeline of events for that person, from his birth to his death, and his relationship to other people that are part of his life. The options on the screen are just some of the ways you can organize your study. Again, the choice is yours. We will show you later the methods both of us use with our studies. You can use software built for the purpose of recording family history, or you can build one for yourself using some of the other options, or you can use a mixture of both. It's your choice. So how are you going to collect data? Some researchers collect a set of core records and build up their data by using other records they find. If, for instance, you were starting in England and Wales, you might collect all the registrations of births, marriages and deaths for a period of years. Then add census entries, burial entries, the actual baptisms and the marriages you can find. You can sort data in spreadsheets, building up a central marriage database for a country by adding events when you find them either to a new person's entry or to an existing person, and I do that in my data. You have many options for transferring information to your study, no matter what method you use to collect the information. A simple method is just to type or transcribe what you find. It can either be straight into your software, or maybe you can write it down, save the piece of paper, and maybe type it in later. With a lot of websites, it's possible to cut and paste information from the page into your choice of software. Some will even cut and paste a whole page straight into a spreadsheet to speed up collection. Just in case you don't know how to do that, simply double left click with your mouse on the first word you want to start with, hold the mouse button down and scroll across the information you want to save. Once you have done that, press the Control button and the C button on your keyboard at the same time. Position with your mouse at the start of the place you want to copy to, and then press Control and the V keys at the same time. And what you say will be pasted into what you've saved it in. It is possible to remove some of the formatting when pasting by just keeping the text with the option displayed using the right mouse button. If you get a copy of Evernote or another note-keeping application, there's a little add-on in your browser. You can save the whole page to your Evernote program, which you can refer to later and copy the information later. You can save the actual page from your browser file button. Outwit Hub is another program that sits within your browser that will extract data and put it in a spreadsheet for you, which Paul Howe will discuss in greater detail. The most important point to remember is always to back up what you have collected. The more places, the better. Use as many free tools as possible. Dropbox is free to a certain size. DVDs, memory sticks. I personally use the cloud and a program called Carbonite that backs up as I make the files. It's possible with my software to add inbuilt fairly simple data, for instance, births, deaths, collected in the form of a comma-separated value format. I started 20 odd years ago collecting what you might call core data by visiting St. Catherine's House and later the family records up in St. Munton and driving onto paper each quarter of a year's records, going home and typing them into my program of choice, the Master Genealogist, making a person and adding an event called birth registration. It took me nearly 10 years to get from 1813-7 to 1901. Yes, the 1911 census had not even been released. So since I can make my own events in a person's life, I could see errors if the record did not fit. For instance, if he was in a census after the date I had for his death, it was obviously an error. The program also shows his parents, his siblings, and his children in separate windows, together with an Explorer window that can be filtered, and you can put people from the Explorer into another focus group. So the top left here is the person view. 3 tabs along the top here, I can click between a tree view and a family view. To the right of the window is the Project Explorer, and the next right is the focus group. This is the children's window, siblings window, in a flag window, which you can set to what you want to see. This is the person view. This shows the events in the focus person's life. I can click on any event or person to go to their person page. It is possible to highlight any event in a different color, and this will appear in all the person pages if they were in that event. As this window shows, the 1881 census is highlighted in purple. You will also note that you can allocate roles in all the events. So in 1881, he was the head of the household. From 1841 to 1861, he was either a witness or a son. You might have noticed that I only use Chapman codes for the 3 BMD indexes, that's births, maths, marriages and deaths. A short code that allows you to reduce the size of the county. In this case, it saves a lot of typing when you're doing searches. The program I have allows many different place formats, so when you enter place information, you have set fields depending on where in the world the event took place. You will also note at the top right here, I have allocated, in this case, P6970. We use this to coordinate research between me and my fellow guild member, also called Paul Featherstone, who works in this area of England. The Project Explorer can be linked to the person window, and here you can see Thomas highlighted in blue that we've just looked at, and a lot of other Thomases at the top of the window alongside sort. Here, you can choose how you want to look at the list. In this instance, it's sorted by given name, surname, and birth date. There are around 50 different options, including Soundex, and if you want a search you build yourself, these can be saved for future searches. So as you can see, I enter the date of the census. Thomas's status as ahead of here. His occupation goes in the memo field, and it also lists who was in the census with him. I don't add servants, but they can be found within the citation field. You will also note that the name can also be changed if he was known as something else, as was his wife's name. I changed it to Featherstone because she was married, and that's how she appears in the census. This is the information I put into each census citation. It contains the reference where it is and those listed, which is why I like VanMyFast and their layout of census information. Here are some of the saved searches which I can pull up when I need it. Birth reg, this is a simple search there, which I have set up with a 2-year split on the year of registration, a given name and a county Chapman code. And that's what it looks like. So I pick it, if I'm looking at the census, knowing I've got all the BMD indexes recorded, if I'm searching for a person that fits into a census entry, I do a search for the given name with the year of birth given in the census, but allowing a 2-year swing and the county Chapman code, which in this case is North Riding of Yorkshire. This is just one of the uses of the Project Explorer. It can do the same for marriages and deaths or search a range of dates. This comes in very useful for looking people who might be able to include in a guild marriage challenge. So the first line is the registration district, in this case Bideford. Second line is the surname, and that about covers all my variant surnames. And then the date that the dates that the marriage challenge is going to cover. The release of the new DRO indexes mean I have to revisit the early birth indexes and add those named to my data. So I set up a flag and colour those people without parents a nice pink. Run a filter in the Project Explorer and added birth registrations for a quarter to the focus group. Then I collected the males and females from the DRO index and cut and pasted them into a text document. I use a free program called Notepad++. That is, it has the capability to remove unwanted text from the pasted information, and I like to tidy up each entry to go into the citation fields. So you can see behind the event opened up, and at the front the citation field opened up. Few tricks I found useful. I massage the source numbers so that source number 1 is a birth registration, 2 is a marriage registration, and 3 is a death registration. This saves time when going to the sources, which seems to grow every day. I have done the same with all the censuses and the 1939 register. So source 911 is the 1911 census, and source 1939 is the 1939 register. I make a source for every baptism register and each marriage and burial register if I'm entering a church record, quoting the details found in the citation field, and the source is selected from this list, which I think the last count was 2,548 different sources. I treat these sources with images and those with transcriptions differently too. This image gives a synopsis of the current state of my data. Well, at least when I made the slide. It changes day to day. I might tie in a birth, a marriage and a death, add a spouse, add a census entries, a will here or there. My program is no longer supported, but it works, and I have looked at all the other options. I copy across once a month into Family Historian, just in case, but I hope to be one of the first users of the planned replacement called History Research Environment, or HRE for short, when it is ready for testing later this year. To finish off, you will discover more variants of your surname as you progress. I once found an early Cambridge graduate with his name spelt 15 different ways. Fortunately for me, he ended up being hung, drawn and quartered when he would not support Henry VIII's stand against the Catholic Church. I discovered that Featherstone had been changed over several generations in Cheshire, from the original Featherstone, from the original to Featherstone, and then to Fatherstone. It makes it worthwhile when you record sources that you can find them again if you need to, which is why I like to record what I see. It's your study, you record what you want. No people do exactly the same, as you will see during this presentation. And now over to my fellow presenter, Paul Howes.
Okay, Paul talked about how different studies are, and talked about how it took him 10 years to achieve all the births, marriages and deaths from England and Wales between 1837 1900. For me, I started my study in the electronic age, and with some elaborate cutting and pasting, I got all of mine in a couple of afternoons from 1837 to 1940. Most recently, I did the same thing for a new one-name study I'm just taking on, and I was able to download all the births and marriages and deaths from 1837 to 1983 and set them up in spreadsheets in less than 10 minutes. That's how much things have changed. Now, my approach is going to be exactly the same as Paul's. Here are the contents for my presentation the next few minutes. You'll see it's pretty much the same as what Paul talked about, but now I'm going to show you some of the differences. And hopefully that button will click onto the next page. There we are. So, because I started my study in the electronic age, my aims were quite different. I had a very large study, and I realized that it was too big for me to do on my own. Consequently, I decided to go online and to put what I could online and use that data online as a means for finding other researchers. And 10 years later, almost 1,300 correspondents says I probably did the right thing. So for me, data gathering was relatively low priority to going online. I wanted to gather enough data to act as good checklists, and I'll show you an example of that later on. I figured out very early that you could gather too much data and spend too much time on checklists and not enough time on actually doing the family reconstruction that would get me more correspondence. So I stopped collecting too much data. I figure that most of the commercial providers are very good at collecting data and showing it online in an orderly fashion, so I myself didn't need to bother. Now, approaches for data gathering, using a couple of commercial providers that I subscribe to, but I try and deal with small data sets now when I find them. To give you an example, the Victoria Cross is a very unusual honor to receive if you're a soldier. It's the highest honor that anybody in the Commonwealth can receive. I found one for a person named Howes. He was Australia's first Victoria Cross winner, Captain, as he then was, General Neville Howes. And I checked the data set to see if there was another one, and indeed there was. There was a man named House who had won a VC in South Africa, so I added him into my database, built a family around him. No need to go back to that data set. I looked out, especially early on, I looked out for free access to various databases around the world and took full advantage of that. In fact, I used to send out notes to my correspondents saying, hey, this stuff's free for the next few days, so why don't you go and take a look as well? So people got a little bit more value from signing up to my study than just a monthly newsletter. I try and leverage visits I make. So if I have to go to a local graveyard to find some Howes gravestones, for example, I try and leverage that and take pictures of gravestones for other guild members studying the names on those gravestones, and also get some leverage out of it because I like to walk during the day every day, and so I get some personal exercise at the same time. Also try and leverage my visits to maximize the data gathered per time spent, and I'll talk about a couple of ways in which I do that a bit later on. My one regret about being rather passive in terms of not collecting too many data sets is that 2 or 3 years ago, the Irish government put all their births, marriages and deaths online, almost up to the present day. And I thought, oh, well, great, they've put it online. It'll be there whenever I want it. Wrong. Somebody told them about data protection and they withdrew all the most recent ones. And unfortunately, I missed that one. There we are. Life is not always perfect. The sources I use, I mentioned the commercial providers. I use Ancestry, Find My Past, and so on, Family Search. I also got access to, through a local library, I believe, here in the US, to some databases run by a company called Gale, and they were absolutely fantastic. I managed to download about 2,000 obituaries from New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, Boston Herald, and so on. And I've got those all in a database. And again, talking about leveraging my time, when I'm traveling, I'll go through that database and try and identify individuals in my database who match up with those obituaries, and I'll copy and paste the text into that person's record. Specialist websites are as Paul said, there are too many to list really, but obviously FreeBMD is a perfect one for the UK, for England and Wales, that is, for births, marriages and deaths. For the Commonwealth War Graves website, there, cwgc.org, lists all the servicemen who've died for King or Queen and country within the Commonwealth. There are 723 people named Howes in that, and I have one couple in England who's working through that database, rebuilding families around every single individual in there with the purpose of honoring the war dead. And we only have 30 or 40 people left to go. Find a Grave is another fantastic website, especially where somebody has managed to link the people whose gravestones are there to their parents or their siblings or their children. It's very helpful. The British National Archives is one that I've used. In fact, it's a source of considerable embarrassment to me that I'd never been to the National Archives in the UK until last autumn, when I managed to get a visit there, and I was able to download for free about 1,500 wills and service records for people named Howes. And if I'd ordered each one of those online, they would have cost me £3.50 each. That's about $5. So I saved $7,500 from spending a day and a half there looking to see what they had. British County Record Offices, if I'm traveling around and about, I'll take the opportunity to spend an afternoon in a record office I haven't been to before and try and find some data there that's quick and easily accessible, which I can download or copy and paste or enter straight into my database. I'll give you a good example of that in a minute. Newspaper archives are fantastic. London Times, which many people can get. I can get it through my local library here in Florida. It has 200 years of fully searchable archives. The Brooklyn Eagle is a newspaper that is not well known, but Brooklyn is kind of the poor stepchild of Manhattan, if you like. And people in Brooklyn, certainly in the 19th, early 20th century, didn't like that. Their newspaper, the Brooklyn Eagle, thought it was every bit the equal of the New York Times and published news from around the world. So there's Brooklyn Eagle's a fantastic source. Occasionally, when I've been traveling across the US, I've been to US state archives. I managed to wangle a day in Jackson, Mississippi fairly recently on a road trip to Dallas and spent a day in there. Copying out information from death certificates that didn't seem to be available anywhere else. The LDS Family History Library, I've been to RootsTech 3 or 4 times now, and I leverage my trip there to spend some days in the Family History Library. It is the most fantastic resource, and if you're careful about what you look for, you can find stuff there which you can't find anywhere else. There are some books that they have there. Some of the books are actually online. While you're in the library, access to Fold3, the military history database for US, mainly for the US, is easy to get there. and also microfilms for New York City marriages, about which I'll probably talk a bit more in a little while. Graveyards I've already mentioned, but finally on this slide, I should mention too as sources other guild members and what I call customers. So other guild members, we're very good at collaborating, sharing information about marriages. Paul mentioned marriage challenges, but also I get maybe 1 or 2 a week. Guild members will send me cuttings from their local newspapers with a program called Guild Newswatch. So those will frequently have marriage information, but more usually obituaries, which I can then use to either build a family around or slot in or correct information that I already had on that person or just add to it. What people I call customers are all the 1,300 plus people now who signed up on my website for regular monthly emails. I call them customers because I think of my one name study like a business. And you know, you've got to look after your customers first. If you look after them, they look after you. All right, let's switch to the next page. So the methods I use, we've already talked about: downloading, visiting archives. When you're in archives, pen and paper is kind of the least desirable, A, because it takes longer, and B, because you introduce an extra element of risk in having to transcribe twice. So best to minimize that risk and type straight into the database if you can. Photographs, very quick and useful. I've used photographs in Family History Library when I was running out of, in Salt Lake City, when I was running out of time there one day. I had my wife came to get me, and so she was running off getting microfilms while I was winding them on to the correct page. I used my camera to take a photograph and then wound it back. My wife would take that back to the stack, get another microfilm. We were able to work very quickly, and then I transcribed later on from effectively a copy of the original. Download Plus, this is using some software called Data Scrapers. Paul mentioned it briefly. The best known one is probably Outwit Hub. Once you get used to the software, you can set it up so that it downloads information straight into a spreadsheet in an easily recognizable form from multiple pages. So let's say you're on the New England Genealogical Historic Society, the NEHGS website, looking for Social Security Death Index information. Using Outwit Hub, if you set that up, you can go script multiple screens worth of data in very small time. I was able to download 2,000 SSDI entries for people named Howes in less than 10 minutes once I'd set up the scraper. And of course, the transcription standard was absolutely perfect, straight from the original. I get daily web search results for my surname. I study multiple names, lots of different spellings of Howes, but I also include House, H-O-U-S-E. There's no point setting up a daily web search for them because you get a lot of stuff that isn't relevant for genealogy. I get daily obituary feeds from those two sources, and I've now got some volunteers in the UK who get those same feeds and try and build families around people for whom obituaries appear online. And I mentioned the marriage challenges there, so lots of different methods of grabbing data. And here's a bit of a summary. I told you how I used my camera, gravestones, books. I did the same thing on another visit to the LDS Family History Library in Salt Lake City. Again, running out of time, I was getting information off a book online on the screen, so I just kept to use my camera and take lots of screenshots and transcribe them later. My laptop is like my right arm. And obviously emails are a huge tool in that I correspond with my 1,300 correspondents. I reckon about half of them have actually provided me with information on their own families. I see there's a question from the audience about what the software was called. The scraper is called Outwit Hub, O-U-T-W-I-T-H-U-B. And just Google it, you'll find it quick enough. How to organize it? I use my family history program, which I use Family Historian. Started off using Family Tree Maker, but I find Family Historian much more flexible and much better for genealogy. There's lots of things you can do with that you can't do in Family Tree Maker. And I try to restrict that to actual reconstructing families only. If I do get the occasional, what I call singleton, if I'm in a library and I find a biography on an interesting person, I may enter that person with the intention of building a family around them and then get sidetracked. You know how it is. Spreadsheets I use those for checklists only, or I've got data files. I mentioned my US obituary data files. I've also got lots of images of US military records and federal gravestone applications, which I will transcribe at one point. They're all sitting in organized data files right now. Talked about how I have volunteers from within my study to build families around war graves and daily obituaries. I should probably say here, you know, after 10 years, we've 130,000 people in reconstructed families in our database. Frequently now, where even in the US, when somebody starts building a family, we'll fairly rapidly build back to somebody that's already in our database. I get very pleased when that happens. Kind of demonstrates that we're getting more mature in our study. The one thing I don't find that easy to organize is a web page of early occurrences of our name. They don't fall into easy databases. You get that information from all kinds of different places. So instead, I put it all in a web page, loosely in a kind of spreadsheet format, and add to it whenever I come across something else. At some point, we may be able to build some families around those folks. We do have one family that I can trace back to before 1538 when parish registers started. But right now I think there's 60 or 70 early occurrences of our name in that list. And Justice Paul, it's very important. You've got all this data in lots of different formats. You must have multiple backup copies. For me, I've got hard drives attached to my PC here. I use backups in the cloud. My web page is itself a backup. And the cloud storage, my cousin in England and another guy who named Howes, who helps with family reconstruction, they both download copies of our master file every week to their own computers. So even if the cloud goes down, there's still copies of our work out there with trusted sources. Here's an example of a master spreadsheet. This is the bottom end of a spreadsheet that I've got of marriages in England and Wales for 1837 to 1950. That's as much as I dared go at one point, have trustworthy data. You'll see I have the year, the quarter, the surname, the given name, the surname of the spouse, the given name of the spouse, the registration district, and then the volume and page numbers, which you can use to request a certificate if you want. And finally, the actual date of the marriage and the location of it. If you go down to those totals at the bottom, you'll see I've got almost 24,000 marriages in my study, and for that time period and those locations, so just England and Wales. If you look at the second lot of totals there, you'll see that we've identified almost 18,000, so 17,949 spouses where we've identified the given names. So what that means is that we've reconstructed a family around that marriage. So we've done over 3/4 of all the marriages now in England and Wales after 10 years. And if you look at that total down in the bottom right, you'll see we know the actual location for well over 7,000 of those marriages, so almost 30% of the total. That gives us a great way of answering the question that an old guild member asked me one day, which is, how will you know when you've finished if you don't keep checklists? So reconstructing families is our main goal. We work from commercial data. We enter every single detail. That's 4 lines per person from most censuses. That's the name. Second line is the date of birth and place of birth. Third line, which doesn't exist for everybody, is an occupation. And the fourth line is the date and the place of residence. you kind of get used to the pattern. Some data leads naturally into being entered directly into our database. So when I was doing New York City marriages, for example, they're absolutely brilliant in that they show the full names of both parents of both parties. So that's already a family structure for you. So when I was doing that, I entered them straight into my database. And there's a similar database available for births and deaths for Norwich, my hometown in the UK. And what we do is then we use additional data to add color to the individuals, or as a first person in a new family. You can hear that from what I described all the way through. And so just as an example, here is my great-grandfather's brother, Arthur Robert Howes, and you'll see how when we record the different name and the source every time, you'll see how we work. So we've got Arthur Robert Howes, which is his full name. That was used in 7 different sources, including on his birth certificate, obviously where you'd expect it. His name was shortened to A. Howes on the death report of one of his daughters. Arthur R. Howes, Arthur Howes, and Arthur R. Howe with no S at all in one census. And you can see underneath that list is a whole different lot of birth informations. So you can see that we record every single piece of information. My point is here that we're very simplistic on the use of census. So you can see 1901 census, well, big deal. But if we give you all the information from that 1901 census, you can go back and check our work very easily. So the point of sourcing, help other people check your research, take a simplistic approach towards sourcing. I found that full citations were taking up way too much space and simply giving lots of adverts for certain commercial providers who shall remain nameless. Final little trick we do is if we get help from other one-name studies, I record that as a source. And then if I do a search on one-name study, I can demonstrate that we're currently up to 112 other one-name studies from whom we've had significant help. It's much appreciated. And with that, I'm going to hand you back to Julie.
We were kind of throwing this around between everyone as opposed to the first one we did. So it's always a learning curve. Just so you know, Jeff Rasmussen makes it look very easy. It's not. One thing I wanted to point out was Paul Howes's website that he uses, and it's Howes Family website. One thing to take a look at, and you have this in your PDF, is the Featherston One Name Study and the Howes One Name Study. If you take a look at these websites, it really gives you a good idea of how someone else is putting their study together, or the types of things they share, or how they enter their information in. And as both Paul said before, everyone does it a little differently, but I find it really helpful to take a look at these websites and get an idea of maybe images that you want to use, or kinds of stories you want to tell, or the types of records you want to look at, because it's all there in their websites. And then finally, of course, I want to mention the Guild's website, because the Guild also gives you a lot of information about conducting a one-name study and some information that would be helpful. So you can connect with Paul Featherston's study at the website that's listed there. You can connect with Paul Howes's study at howesfamily.com. And you can connect with the Guild. And now I'm going to turn it over to the question section. And so that's perfect. We're on that one slide. I wanted to go back and both Pauls, if you'll go ahead and unmute your mics so that when the question comes to you or you want to answer it, you're ready to do that. And one of the earlier questions we got was from Judith, and she wanted to know a little bit more about how you downloaded large amounts of information with the obituaries. And I think you mentioned Outwit Hub, but also this feeds into another question, which is that still the program that you're using, or how do you download obituary information?
Okay, I'll go first if you like.
Great.
Outlet Hub works really well on lots of websites where you have lots of structured information. That is, pages and pages and pages that look the same from one page to the next. So imagine, for example, you're on familysearch.org and you search for the name Howes, and you get 500 screens of data come up. And You can get 75 entries on a page. If you set up your scraper, Outwit Hub, you can tell the Outwit Hub program the pattern of the information that you're looking at and what button to press effectively to get to the next page. So it downloads those 75, clicks on the next page button for you, downloads the next 75, and so on until it finishes. It's amazingly effective. I don't think folks at Ancestry or Find My Past or commercial providers like it that much, but I don't see any reason why you can't use it, to be honest. Now, having said that, it is incredibly easy to download lots of data. The problem is, once you've downloaded it, what do you do with it? How do you manage it? And I personally found that very quickly that I could download more data than I could possibly handle. So that's when I stopped collecting lots of data and actually then focused on reconstructing families. Websites like Find a Grave, I don't believe they're structured in exactly the same way that you can go through gobs and gobs of information and download it all. Possibly it could be. But so anyway, that's my approach. I tend not to download lots of gravestone information all in one go. You can miss things. You can miss the pictures and so on that come with it, or the explanations around family structure, or the additional obituary information that's often present on some of those pages. We tend to do that one at a time, one person at a time now, one family at a time.
Okay. Paul Featherston, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that?
No, I would say that the days are long past when I collect data in bulk. Unless it's a new data set that I've never come across before, I would say I tend to do it one at a time now as well.
Okay. And I would just remind people that if you want to use that feature in Family Search, you need to have an account, but the account is free. No one contacts you. It's a pretty simple matter. And in fact, I would encourage people to have an account at Family Search. And if you do that, you can export, and I think it's 20, 50, or 75. You choose that number. And that's a pretty easy way of doing things. They also have something called a source box where you can put that source that you're using in there. And so it's really a good idea, I think, for people to take a look at the subscription services they're using to see if they have any source boxes or saved searches or anything, because that's always something you can go back to. So that's pretty helpful. All right, we got another question from Cassandra. And she wanted to know, Paul House, how you set up your daily web search and data feeds. And I think you were talking about something to do with obituaries. Maybe legacy is one of those.
Yes, okay. There are two different daily web searches that we use. There are two main companies that we go to, tributes.com and legacy.com. And you can set it up there to search for your own surname and give you a daily email with, I think today's had half a dozen different obits in it. You know, when a family pays for an obit, often they'll pay for a week or so. So you will see that same data item appearing in your daily web search or your daily download from legacy.com every day for a week. Let's see, with daily web search, it's slightly different. Honestly, it's so long ago now, it must be 5 or 6 years that I set it up, but I suspect if you go to search.google.com or an equivalent on any web browser, you can find that same web search facility. Set up your own daily web search very easily.
And I think when you do that, you go into Google and you tell it what you want it to search for. And for instance, I have it searching for Keogh and a couple different spellings, but I don't want Keogh anywhere near a retirement plan, because there is in the United States, there's a Keogh retirement plan. And so it would bring up things I'm not interested in. And depending on your surname, you choose whether you want to limit it or increase it or whatever. But if you play around with it a couple of weeks, and I think I get mine on a weekly basis, then it gives you results, and then you can kind of filter and play with it. But Google pretty much walks you through it. I'm guessing that, as you said, the other browsers have that same kind of feature. Paul Featherston, do you use the same kind of feature?
Yeah, I have a daily Google on I think my 5 most popular variants, and I get something every day.
Oh, great.
I think one little thing I'd say, Tessa, is that you have to be judicious in your use of minus signs. So where you find retirement, for example, you put minus retirement, and it'll give you all the references to Keogh without the retirement plans. There are a couple of newspapers that around the world where one has a photographer called Mick Howes and another one has a financial correspondent called something Howes. And by judicious use of the minus sign, I don't see anything from those papers. Otherwise, it would swamp everything else every day.
Okay, that's good to know.
I have the same problem. I have the same problem with Featherstone Rovers. Rugby team.
Yeah. All right, Paul Howes, you mentioned in your organization that you used checklists, and I think it was with spreadsheets, but I'm not sure. But Kate wanted to know specifically what you meant by checklists and how you use them with your one name study.
Okay. There are basically 2 fundamental things that you need to do in any one name study. One of them is gather data, and the other thing is reconstruct families. I sort of gave you a strong impression in my presentation that my main approach is towards reconstructing families. But a very long-standing member of the Guild asked me one day a challenging question: Paul, how will you know when you've finished? And that's a really good question. A lot of wisdom in that question. And I eventually came to realize the answer to that is that you have to have a checklist of all the possible occurrences. So you have to download the data for all the marriages. And we're fortunate in England and Wales that those checklists exist for as long as they do, almost 200 years. And they're 99.9% accurate, let's say. So once you've downloaded that data, if you cross off or color in or highlight an entry, once you have it in your main program, then you're using your data as a checklist to answer the question, how will I know when I'm finished?
Great, so you're basically just going through and making sure that whatever you took from your data collection, you're using in your software program, and whatever method someone chooses, you know, coloring in or whatever you said, the highlighting, or making a note of it, or giving them a specific number that's assigned, you know, to kind of, you're basically doing quality control, making sure what you have in one thing goes into the second, and then you can walk away from that data set that you've collected because you've entered the information.
Yes, indeed. If you've crossed it, if you've highlighted every single birth, every single marriage, and every single death, you know you've done everybody.
Okay, great. All right. Do you do anything differently in that, Paul Featherston?
Yeah, I mean, that flag I used to highlight the people without parents tells me when I've got it all. When I've got no more pink left, I'll know.
All right. We have a question here from Susan. Are there Scottish names in the one name studies?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. I would say, and I'm going to mention to you how you can find those if you wanted to look at specific names, but there certainly are people doing one name studies of Scottish, Irish, British, Spanish, Greek. We have a number of them. I think, Paul, you mentioned at one point, I heard you speak where you said that there were 100 members who are doing studies that aren't even from the British Isles, you know, that they're in other countries. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. That we've been monitoring the number of surnames that are being studied by members where the surname itself originates outside the British Isles for about 5 years. That list started off at 28 and it's now just this past month gone over 100. Asked me to pick a Scottish surname off the top of my head and my brain's gone completely blank, I'm afraid.
That's okay. We'll show people how to find that in a moment. A question from Cassandra is, how do you balance one name study with the research all reasonable sources and the genealogical proofs? Either one of you.
Can you repeat that? How do
Sure.
I?
Okay, let me find that again. How do you balance your one-name study with researching all reasonable sources and genealogical proofs? I think she might be asking, how do you get it all? How do you balance saying, I have a one-name study with all of the possible resources you could use? Do you limit it, focus?
I think you can't put families together without some sort of proof. And if I don't have the proof, I don't put the families together. It's as easy as that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. We occasionally will be, 90% sure that one person really belongs to, or the parents of that person are X, and so they might be in our database twice. If we're not sure, we will make a note on both of those records saying we think this person might be the other person, but we're not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I do the same.
Yeah.
All right.
In certain terms of searching all reasonable searches, I guess it depends what you mean by proof and what you mean by reasonable. I'm sitting here in Florida. I do spend quite a bit of each year in the UK, so I'm able to go visit sources that aren't live online. But I will not go as far as many family members will go of visiting local courthouse, for example, in the county where your ancestors are from. I just cannot do that from where I am. So I solved that particular conundrum by full publicity, so that you can see everything that I've done for every person who's older than 100 years or who has died, actually live online on my website. And if you have any doubts over it, I encourage you to write in and express those doubts, and let's have a conversation. It might be we've made a mistake. It happens, but not very often. Or it might be that we agree that we need some further data to resolve a particular question. That's just fine. But I'm doing the best I can to build a family or rebuild families for people with my name around the world. And then put everything online for people to shoot at. I'm very happy to, when people question what I've done. I assume Paul is too.
Yeah, too true.
All right, we have a comment from Peggy, and she says, unfortunately, this is rather male-dominated, as we lose the women in the families when they marry. How do you reconstruct families when the women change their names?
Go ahead, Paul.
I would say on a one-name study, I will record the spouse of a Featherstone until she dies, and after that, it just goes. So I don't trace anybody personally whose name is not one of my surname variants.
All right, but if you have entered, say you had Paul Featherstone as the male and you had Mary Smith as the female, would you be entering her parents in your program?
Only if they appeared in the census with a Featherstone.
Oh, okay. All right.
My approach is a little bit different from Paul.
Great.
Because we wanted to attract people to our website and be as helpful as we could to other researchers, we note the parents of the non-house spouse, where we see them easily. We don't go into long forays to try and find them, but if they're in a document, a death certificate or a marriage certificate, we'll note them. We also follow the children and the grandchildren of house women. Sometimes those children themselves would retain the house name if the lady wasn't married. But usually they'll change, obviously, when they marry. And we do that so that when somebody Googles, let's say, John Smith, and they find that John Smith, that's a bad example, but if they then, in that Google search, see a reference to housefamilies.com, because John Smith was the son of a woman named House, then they'll realize they had House ancestry and brought to our site. So that's why we do that. We go as far as we do.
And I definitely think it depends on the person doing the study, because I do know some people who have very small studies, and by that I mean they have a rather unusual surname or even a small to medium, and they might enter more of the family members in. I do that because I find that where my surname is from, those people sooner or later come around and marry in again, or somehow are related. And so it really depends on your own study, how much information you want to add.
Yeah,
We're going to take
absolutely.
two more. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I just wanted to add that in a sense, it's the surname itself which is more male dominated. We're not being deliberately sexist or anything in how we work. What fascinates us is where the surname came from. And it just happens that it follows the male line in many instances. In different societies, you get different naming patterns.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense, for example, to do a one name study in a society like with patronymics like Sweden or Wales, because you don't follow families in the same way.
And I will say that I have an example in my family where the couple is giving the surname Keogh, and it's my cousin, she's female. He has 4 brothers, and she's the only one in that particular family that has children. So they've given their children the Keogh surname so that that carries on in that group. And so you would be doing a one name study and picking up that name. So you never know what you're going to find, certainly. Two minor things and 2 minor comments that were made that I want to point out. And then people who didn't get their questions answered today, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take those questions and make sure we put them on our Facebook group or our Facebook page so that you can see the answers, because I don't want to go too much longer over the hour that we said we'd keep you. I know you all have things to do. There was a question, is it legal to download a whole lot of site information? You're always going to need to take a look at the terms and conditions. Some sites are fine with you doing it. Some sites specifically don't allow you to do it. So, you know, even though people don't like to look at it or read through them all, I would take a look at the terms and conditions of each site that you want to use either a scraper on or perhaps a macro. A lot of people use macros to do these things with. Another question is, are there programs that are platform specific? So I think that both of you use a PC, but I'm not sure, but there are programs for Macs as well as PCs that are databases. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And I believe that if you, on the Guild Wiki, there's some discussion about various platforms to use. And then I would also just Google it. If you're looking for a software program, you know, see what's specific to the type of computer that you use.
Yeah, that slide I used, it had at least 2 Mac programs. I think Reunion was on there and Gramps was on there.
Okay.
So that's 2 Mac programs. And I
All
think
right.
you can get Family Tree Maker now for a Mac. So.
Right, and I know some of the other programs are trying to introduce something or using parallels, and you should really ask in the Facebook group. There's a Facebook group for technology, and people discuss the different programs they use or what are the pluses and minuses. So if you're new to choosing a program, you might, in addition to just kicking the tires trying a program, if they have a trial, is talk with other people and see what they use. I'm going to end with this question, and I know that we haven't gotten to a couple other ones, but Judith says she's brand new and just starting her one name study, and she wonders if either of you could address approaching people to join on the website to collaborate as a member of their surname. I haven't yet looked at either site, so she'll do that next. How do you address approaching people to join your website or to get involved with helping you in your research?
Lots of different ways. Actually, on the website itself, there's on my website, at least for the House study, there's a paragraph that says, Paul, I want to help. How can I do that? So yeah, you'll find the answer there. Other things that we do is speak at local family history societies or even occasionally national ones about our one name study or in general, and people come up to you afterwards. I'd say my biggest marketing tool right now is Google and other web search engines. People, you know, they'll just Google a name for somebody in their background and they'll find my site from that. And then we take it from there.
And I would say people love telling you you're wrong.
Well, there's that too. Fortunately, it doesn't happen too often.
No, that's true.
Okay, so they've found your site because they may have Googled themselves, and they find something there and then say, you need to fix this or whatever, and that's how you start the conversation?
Yeah, that's right.
Or they Google an ancestor and suddenly find from the work that we've already done that they can go back 4 or 5 generations further, just from the data that we already have. And then they write in excitedly saying, oh, I've got some extra information, or here are the some details on people who are still alive that you're not showing. All of those things are really great.
Yep, that's true. I also have a Facebook page for my Featherstone name as well, and there's something like 500 people on it. So if I need information, I can usually get it from those.
Okay, great. All right, I just want to confirm that we're going to save the additional questions that we got, and we will be responding to those. We have your email if there's something that was a private question, but otherwise we're going to put them on our Facebook page so that everyone can learn the answer to this, because a lot of times those questions are helpful to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm embarrassed at not having half a dozen Scottish names at my fingertips, but we'll get you a list.
Okay, and we're going to go ahead now and move on to the next. We just have a few things to close up here. Some of you are new to surname research and one name studies, so I would encourage you to visit our website at one-name.org, and if you select home on the drop-down menu, you can learn more about one name studies, starting your own one name study, as well as get some information about possibly joining the Guild. And you can also check to see if any of the surnames that you're interested in are registered studies with the Guild. And this was in reference to the person who might have been asking about a particular Scottish surname. Simply type that surname into the box, and then you can click on the search button. If a surname is registered, you can contact the member, there's that link right there, for more information. And this is an example of Paul House's study. This is his profile on the Guild website. If a surname is not registered, it might be a surname of interest. I've listed a few for other surnames that I'm interested in, but I'm not doing a one name study, and I have a lot of information about them. You can also contact that person that way to find out more information. And if a surname is not registered or not a surname of interest, you might want to consider starting your own one name study and then registering that with the Guild. If you don't find that surname in there and someone referenced that they couldn't find the name, all that means is that we don't have a current member studying that surname. We do not have information on all surnames. That's something more along the lines of the dictionary of surnames or an encyclopedia. But these are surnames that are registered with the Guild.
One obvious way to find quite a few Scottish surnames is to go to our website, do the search for surnames, and at the top it says studies. Go down a level to surnames A to Z, click on M, and you'll find lots of surnames beginning Muck or Mac. Some of them will be Irish, but many of them are Scottish.
Okay, and if you have any questions that we haven't answered today, and I've made a note of some of them, I always think of a question after the webinar is done, or you want to continue the discussion, please do visit us at our Facebook page, and that's just the Guild of One Name Studies. And then members, we have a closed Facebook group, and that's a second place that you can get in touch with us. But definitely the Facebook page always has lots of, I think, interesting information, whether you have a one name study or not, you're just interested in surnames. And finally, thanks so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar in March, where Guild member Howard Matheson will be discussing tracing the origin of surnames. Paul House mentioned that. It's one aspect of doing something with your data is tracing those families back or tracing that name back to find the origins of the surname. So we hope you join us on March 20th. If you haven't already signed up for the webinar, you can go to our website and do that. And we appreciate you spending the last hour and 15 minutes with us. Thank you so much.